A reporter in 1960 asked Louis Armstrong a direct question. Why didn't he ever move back to New Orleans? He was 60 years old by then. He had money, houses, stability. He could have lived anywhere. Armstrong smiled, the large, familiar smile, and said something non-committal about how he liked Queens just fine. He changed the subject. He was very good at changing the subject. But the people who knew him well, the ones who had been with him across the decades and knew how to hear what he wasn't saying, knew the answer. It was not simple. It never was with Louis Armstrong and New Orleans. He was born there in August 1901, in a neighborhood called the Battlefield, on the backside of the city where poverty was the defining condition and music was everywhere. He would say later that the music was the first thing, before everything else. Before understanding what music meant or what it could become, it was simply there. In the streets, in the churches, coming from windows on hot evenings. The city was saturated with it the way no other city in America was or ever has been. He loved New Orleans the way you loved the thing that shaped you before you were old enough to choose what to let in. The love is not optional. It doesn't require the place to be good to you. It doesn't require an accounting of what was given and what was taken. It simply exists, underneath everything else, permanent. He left in 1922. King Oliver sent for him, came to Chicago, joined the band. The music here is ready for you. Armstrong was 21 years old. He packed a bag, bought a train ticket, and stood on the platform at the station with his cornet case in his hand. By every account, he looked back at the city once as the train pulled out. Then he looked forward. He came back, of course. The first time, in 1931, was a homecoming that the city made into an event. He was famous by then, genuinely famous, and New Orleans received him with a celebration that filled the streets. There were parades, there were concerts. Local newspapers ran his name above the fold. Louis Armstrong, who had grown up in the Battlefield neighborhood, who had been sent to reform school at 12, who had left on a train 9 years earlier as a young man with a cornet and no certainty about what was coming, returned as someone the city was proud of. He was proud of them, too. He said so. He played for his city with a fullness that people who were there said was different from his performances elsewhere. Something personal in it, something that could only be produced in that specific place by that specific man. But even during that triumphant return, things happened that the celebration did not make invisible. There were hotels he could not stay in. There were restaurants where he could not eat. The city that was celebrating him that week had also built, and was still maintaining, a system of laws and customs designed to mark the difference between Louis Armstrong and the people who were coming to cheer for him. The cheering did not erase the rest of it. He noticed. He had never stopped noticing. The noticing was one of the things he was good at. The same attention that made him the musician he was also made him a precise observer of every room he walked into, of what was available to him and what wasn't, of the exact temperature of welcome being offered and what it excluded. Over the following decades, he returned several more times. Each visit was some version of the same experience. The genuine love of the city for one of its own, layered over the genuine reality of what the city was. A place that could celebrate a black man on a stage and then enforce, with full institutional support, 100 daily humiliations against the same man once he stepped off it. He chose to live in Corona, Queens. He and Lucille bought the house on 107th Street in 1943 and stayed there for the rest of their lives. It was not a glamorous neighborhood. It was a working-class neighborhood in the northern part of Queens, where many black families lived and where Louis Armstrong could walk to the corner store without managing what walking to the corner store required in certain other places. He chose it deliberately. He liked it. He put down roots there with the same intention he brought to everything else. Neighbors knew him. He shoveled his own walk in the winter. He talked to people on the street. He had friends in the neighborhood who were not musicians, not entertainment people, not connected to his professional life in any way, just people he knew because he lived there and they lived there. He was not performing being a neighbor. He was being a neighbor. New Orleans was the place that made him. Queens was the place he made. There is a difference. In the interviews from his later years, when reporters pushed past the deflections and asked him directly about the city of his birth, Armstrong would sometimes say things that were more specific than his usual cheerful avoidance. He said once that New Orleans was the most beautiful and the hardest city in the world. He said it in a way that made clear these were not contradictory things. He said the beauty was real and the hardness was real, and both of them were in him, and neither one had ever left. He said, "New Orleans made me. That's different from belonging to it. Made me, not belongs to it." He understood the distinction precisely. The city had provided the conditions out of which he had emerged. It had given him the musical language, the specific cultural mix, African, French, Caribbean, everything that converged in that port city over 300 years, that existed nowhere else, and that produced, among all the things it produced, Louis Armstrong. But a city that makes you does not automatically become your home. Home is where you make yourself. He made himself in Chicago. He made himself in New York. He made himself on stages in Copenhagen and Accra and Rio de Janeiro and every place the music took him. He made himself, most permanently, in a house on 107th Street in Queens, where he lived for 28 years, and where, on July 6, 1971, he died in his sleep. The Louis Armstrong House Museum is there now. The house is preserved exactly as it was. His bathroom, his kitchen, his reel-to-reel tapes, his handwritten letters, the specific ordinary objects of a life lived deliberately and well. People come from all over the world to stand in those rooms and understand something about who he was that the recordings and the performances can't quite contain. New Orleans has a statue of him now, in the French Quarter, in the neighborhood where the tourists go to hear jazz on the streets. It is a large statue on a large pedestal. He is smiling, trumpet raised. The city is proud of him. It always was proud of him, even when pride and the actual treatment of him coexisted without embarrassment. He never commented on the statue. He was dead before it was erected. But the people who knew him best said that what he would have thought about it was probably what he thought about most things that honored him from a distance. Polite, receiving it without cruelty, saying something gracious that didn't quite say everything. The city that made him, the house where he chose to stay, the trumpet that went into the ground with him in a cemetery in Queens, far from the streets where he had first heard music coming through the windows on summer evenings. He loved New Orleans. He didn't need to live there to carry it. He carried it in the music, which was New Orleans music no matter what stage he played it on or what country he was in. Every note he played was connected to those streets, to those churches, to that particular air, to the tradition that had formed in that specific place and could not have formed anywhere else. New Orleans made Louis Armstrong, and Louis Armstrong carried New Orleans everywhere he went for 70 years. Every performance, every recording, every note. The city stayed in him. That was enough. He didn't need to go back to hold on to it. It had never left.